This podcast is brought to you by Blackaby Ministries International. To find out more, visit blackaby.org.
Well, welcome to the Richard Blackaby Leadership Podcast. My name is Sam, and I'm your host, and I'm joined by Dr. Richard Blackaby. Good to see you, sir.
Good to be with you, Sam.
We are nearing the end of another year. 2021 is nearly in the rear view now.
Nigh upon us here.
I know, as we approach the Christmas season, and it's just full of joy and happiness and lots of sweets. Yeah, hopefully.
Caloric gain.
It is, yeah. You have to really, it just sneaks up on you. Just, there tends to be cookies and chocolates everywhere, so you got to really.
Right when you think you're safe.
I know, you have to.
Boom, there's a chocolate.
You have to be on your guard, for sure. Well, and as we, approach this Christmas season, had there been any Christmas gifts in the form of W's from your Buffalo
Well,
Sabres?
Just lately they've actually been on a bit of a roll here. They're still out. They're starting two goalies are out injured, but they've brought in. They're on number 4, number 5 goalies right now that have actually done not so bad for them. Wow. There's glimmers of hope.
As there
burns eternal.
The proverbial hope.
But wait till next year.
Yeah.
Boy.
Oh, yeah.
Then it will all come together.
Yeah. The pieces finally fit together next year. Well, Richard, you've written quite a few books over the years, and one I think that has been gotten a lot of great reviews and people really gravitate toward. And I think it's your wife's favorite book.
It is, yep.
That you've written, which that's saying something.
Yeah.
That's a great endorsement for sure. And it's called Putting a Face on Grace. And of course, we'll leave links to this in the show notes. But we thought we'd, in this season of grace, take a look at this book and what it can remind us of and what it has to offer us this Christmas season. And why don't you just kind of walk us through the high level points of Putting a Face on Grace, why you wrote it, and really who it's for.
Well, it's we kind of felt like this would be a nice time of the year to talk about this book. It is my wife's favorite book. It's called just Putting a Face on Grace. And so most Christians believe in grace. You can't even be a Christian unless you've experienced the grace of God. So we're big fans of it. A lot of people, their favorite hymn is Amazing Grace. Mm-hmm. We love to sing about how God's grace has done so much for us. It's forgiven us and transformed us, and given us a new beginning. And when we think of all the ways that God's grace has blessed us, we're just overwhelmed by His goodness. Yeah. But one of the reasons I wrote this book is because I feel like there's something of a paradox that takes place, because Christians of all people ought to be the biggest fans of grace, because we've got the most to gain from it. Our entire eternity has been changed. We've got a mansion waiting for us in heaven, all by the grace of God, adopted as children of God, as fellow heirs with Christ. We've got to be big fans of grace. But what I've discovered is that a lot of times we're great about receiving grace. We're not always so good about giving grace. Mm-hmm. And you would think that to whom much has been given, that we would be the most generous in giving much to others. But it's ironic how that is. And I think in the last couple of years especially, we've just seen a real polarization in America, of course, and even a lot of Christians are getting kind of thin on grace. We're becoming very graceless toward those that we disagree with, toward those that we feel like are opposing us or our viewpoints, and it's a shame, because this is a wonderful opportunity for Christians in the midst of very polarized society. What an opportunity for Christians to demonstrate grace.
Yeah. Well, there's never been a greater need for grace than in today's society. And it is a shame that the church has seemed to be less on grace recently in recent times.
It's and so and I tell some fun stories in the book. But I remember when I was in university, I had a class. He was actually he taught a sociology class on the sociology of deviance. And of course, one of the first points he tries to make is everybody taking the class assumes they aren't a deviant, that we're all the normal ones. Let's study about all the abnormal people in our society. And he told us about an experiment he'd done a couple years earlier where he had given a midterm exam, and then he called it the stairway system, where he tossed all the midterm exams down the stairwell, and he picked the top 7 that were near the top of the stairs still. And he took all those, and he entered all the grades. So all the grades were entered accurately. But then he took 7 of them, and he just on the top of the page, he just basically gave 10% more. He added 10% to all the grades. Now this is in Canada, so like in Canada, 80% was an A, and so you had 20% to play with. No one ever saw a 90 or above in there. They were mostly essay questions. So he just, everyone's got a really good paper was maybe an 83% or something. And so he would just write 93 on it. And then he went to the bottom of the stairwell, and it took the bottom 7 midterms and took whatever the grade was, and he wrote in 10% less. And so 7 people have 10% more, 7 have 10% less, and everybody else is just how it came out. And so he hands them all back the next week. And so a week later, when the class meets again, he kind of explains what he did. He confesses, and he says, now it's interesting, he said, because he said 14 of you got grade results that were not accurate, that were either too high or too low. He said, guess how many people came to see me this week to point out my mistake? Well, there were 7 people had come. And wouldn't you know it, the 7 who got too little grade had all come, had done the math and come and pointed out. And the 7 who had gotten more than they actually deserved, not one of them had come. And not one had pointed out to the professor that he'd made a mistake, and they actually had deserved 10% less. Now, he assured them that he had not kept track of anyone's name. Nobody was going to be penalized because of that experiment, and that all the grades were actually entered accurately so that none of them had to come back and point it out. But that was a powerful example that basically 7 of those, all 7 for 7, were happy to receive something they didn't deserve. Yeah. But they were irate and hurriedly making their way to the professor's office if they felt like they weren't getting what they deserved. Yeah. And so we're happy to receive, but I tell you what, we don't trust people that if we think that maybe they're cheating us somehow. And it's just been interesting to me to see how even people that would see themselves as very healthy, normal people, if they feel like they're missing out on something, boy, they can raise a fuss. But if it comes in any way to being generous with others, or maybe giving some things away that they have so someone else can have them, a lot of times we turn into what I call grace tightwads. All of a sudden we're not so excited about that. And I remember when I was in seminary hearing about, everywhere I went, I saw these buildings with the last name Fleming on them. The Fleming Library, the Fleming this, Fleming that. He'd been a wealthy, a millionaire oil man. And one day his pastor paid a visit with him, and Fleming's feeling a little bit guilty. And he said, now, Pastor, you just have to understand, he said, I grew up tithing on my income, but he said, now I make so much money, I can't afford to tithe anymore. He said, I just make too much money. Do you want a tithe like 10% of my gross earnings would come to? Like, I just can't afford that. So he said, I'm giving quite a bit, but I just can't give that much. And so his pastor very wisely looked at him and said, I tell you, I just can't even imagine how hard that would be, like having that many millions of dollars and then trying to give 10% of it away to God and his work. So he said, listen, I'll tell you what, I'm going to pray that God will reduce your income down to a level that you can finally afford to start tithing again. and right away the Fleming said, no, don't do that. He said, let me talk to my accountant again and see if we can't work anything out. And, isn't it interesting? Sometimes the more you have, sometimes you can actually be cheaper. You can be more possessive, more afraid of losing what you have instead of being more generous. And, of course, no one has received more than Christians have. And yet, and so we ought to be the most generous people around. And even if people are they seem like they've got their hands out and they seem fairly needy, I get it. A lot of Christians will say, well, we're just enabling this bad behavior, or, they need to get up on their own 2 feet or whatever. Sometimes that's the case. I mean, sometimes people really have just gone through some really tough luck and, gone through difficulties that we would never, be able to even comprehend. But you just sort of think that maybe Christians, though, at some level ought to say, after all that God has given me, the least I could do is just give some back. I don't deserve. That's the funny thing I hear a lot of people say. Yeah. They'll say, well, but, why would I give, charity to that person? I mean, they need to just go get a job. They just need to go earn it, or someone offends you and you're challenged to, well, you should forgive them. Well, I can't forgive them. They haven't even apologized. They don't even acknowledge that they've hurt me.
They haven't shown the proper penance.
Yeah, right. They don't deserve to be forgiven. And you'd say, well, that's what grace is. Grace is giving people what they don't deserve. And it's interesting how whether we would say it in that many words or not, we somehow kind of feel like we do deserve what God gives us.
Yeah.
But other people don't deserve our generosity toward them. And you just say, well, no, wait a minute. You don't deserve all that God has blessed you with. And, I'm very aware. I mean, I didn't grow up in a wealthy family. You didn't either, Sam. But still, I mean, comparatively to the world population, we still were blessed with all kinds of benefits just from the nature of the country we were born in and the opportunities to go to school and other things that lots of people in the world would never even dream of the possibility. And I know that I've been very fortunate in so many different ways. And I know it had nothing to do with me. I didn't pick the family I was born in. I didn't pick the country I was born in. I've worked hard. I've tried to make the best of what I've been given, but I got a big head start over a lot of other people, and I know that, and I'm grateful for that. And you want to try to help others that maybe didn't get the same benefit, but then there's just, I don't know what it is, why we somehow lose sight of that. How fortunate and blessed we are. And and the sad thing is sometimes with family gatherings and Christmas, the sad thing is, I mean, Christmas is supposed to be such a joyous time. There ought to be so much laughter and storytelling and game playing and great eating, and yet every year at Christmas there are suicides, there are angry arguments, and people angrily leaving the house upset because of what someone said. And you think, well, this is Christmas. Like, why would two people in the family ever get into an argument at such a joyous time? Why wouldn't they just let that go? Why would they just not, talk politics over Christmas dinner?
The one day of the year.
It's just like, why would you have even gone there? But for a lot of times we just don't show enough grace, and we don't. We're just adamant they're not going to get away with saying that or doing that, and I'm going to give them a piece of my mind. And grace. I think the thing I like about grace, it's hard to define grace in one sense. It's a gift. It's how God demonstrates His love, but it's easier to kind of see the kind of things grace does. And for instance, grace, I think, sees what matters and it sees what doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And grace just says, you know what? Winning an argument about politics at Christmas dinner is not that. Nobody wins in that case. Sure, they got up and angrily left the table. Does that mean I won? Because my brother-in-law is not talking to me now, or my brother or my sister. Was that really worth that? Grace just says, people matter more than politics. People matter more than winning an argument, and sometimes just not saying something is wiser than giving my opinion and offending three people at the table. Did I really have to say that? And grace has a way of breathing life into people. Grace is what facilitates forgiveness and kindness and giving to people that don't even deserve to receive. But your heart is so full of God's grace for you, and you're so overwhelmed by His goodness to you that you just can't help but want to pass it on to someone else. And of course, there's the famous story in Matthew, I think chapter 18 or so, where Jesus tells that amazing parable of the man who is brought to account, and he owes 10,000 talents, and he can't pay it, and it would have been an enormous fortune, and he's going to be thrown in jail. He's going to be made a slave for the rest of his life. His family's going to be enslaved, and then it says that the king felt compassion for him and said, "You're forgiven. You don't know a thing. Just walk away." And incredible grace. This guy must have been stealing from the guy with both hands, just continuously, just brazenly, greedily, taking far more than he even could ever spend in a lifetime. And yet the owner has compassion anyway, and just from the grace of his heart just says, you're forgiven. You clean slate, try it, start over again. And then of course that famous story, the guy that's just been forgiven walks out and runs into a guy who owes him 100 denarii, a pittance compared to what he's just been forgiven, and he's grabbing him by the scruff of the neck, shaking him and demanding full payment right away. And you just marvel. You just say, well, that's just the most absurd thing I've ever heard. How could you be forgiven 60 million days' wages and then get upset for a guy that owes you 100 days' wages?
Yeah.
But such is the case with a lot of God's people. We've been forgiven an enormous amount, and then people offend us in even sometimes pretty light ways, and we can't let it go. We just can't walk away. Yeah. And so certainly, one of my prayers would be for our listeners this year is just take some time to especially if you got a family gathering coming, or maybe you got kind of a brother-in-law or somebody that, rubs you the wrong way, and it's like, oh, we always seem to get into it every year. We cheer for different football teams or whatever, and he always makes these obnoxious comments, and I always feel like I have to give a rebuttal, and it's maybe this year, God, just give me the grace to just celebrate what really matters, and just ignore, let go, release what doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And over the Christmas season, hopefully you take a bit of time just to reflect on the grace that God has shown you, just how much He's given you that you don't deserve, and just get your heart so full of gratitude toward God's grace towards you that you're so overwhelmed by the goodness of God that you can't help but just want to pass that grace on to all the people that you run into during the holidays.
Yeah. Well, let's take a quick break here, and we'll wrap up when we come back.
Hello, I'm Richard Blackaby, and I'm president of Blackaby Ministries International. On behalf of my parents and the whole Blackaby team, I want to just thank you for your friendship, your support, your prayers for our ministry. These have been challenging times, and there's been all kinds of difficulties and challenges and hurdles to overcome that churches and individuals and ministries have never had to face before. But I'm reminded of what Paul said in Philippians, where he said, I give thanks to my God for every remembrance of you, always praying with joy for all of you in my every prayer because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. And that's certainly my heart as well, to thank you for your partnership with us. And I wanted just to let you know, especially as we come to the end of this year, that a wonderful friend of our ministry just believes so much in what God is doing that he has offered a $100,000 matching gift to our ministry, which means that anyone who gives a donation to our ministry from this point onward through the end of the year, he'll match it up to $100,000. So if you were thinking of giving us $100,000, this is the time to do it, because it will be completely doubled by this wonderful donor. But seriously, we just want to encourage you that if the Lord has placed us on your heart, this is a great time to do that, because it will release the matching amount of money. And we just have a conviction here at Blackaby Ministries that God is doing some amazing things right now. Everywhere I go and speak, there just seems to be a hunger and a great response. And so we are looking forward to the year ahead and what God will do. And if you can help in matching this very special gift, it will enable us to be fully prepared to respond to everything God will ask us to do. So thank you for all that you've done, and we look forward to serving with you, partnering with you in the year ahead.
Well, Richard, I do find that very odd that people have such a easy time receiving grace, but such a hard time giving grace. And I think oftentimes, I know I'm guilty of this, is we kind of get into these tunnel vision type scenarios where we have a hard time stepping back and seeing the bigger picture, like you said before the break. And, you know, whether that's a coworker or whoever that just gets under your skin, or these little things that we can really get upset about that really ultimately don't matter.
Yeah.
And but we have such a hard time getting past that. So maybe just in the last few minutes of our conversation today, you could just share with us some practical tips for understanding and getting us in the right headspace to be more grace giving.
Yeah, I think, we've got to get past our feelings sometimes, just to stop and ask the question, so what matters here? What is important? And number one, you need anyone I see that struggles to give grace to other people, they've got way too low of a view of how much grace they require from God themselves.
Yeah.
If they had any sense of how much grace they have received, like John Newton, who said, saved a wretch like me. He knew he was a wretch. If you're a wretch that God has forgiven and made a joint heir with Christ, then you know full well that you can't be holding anybody to a strict line and saying, you don't deserve that.
Yeah.
Because you know just how fortunate you've been. And I remember I tell some stories in the book, but one that I remember really impacted me back at the time I wrote it. There was a guy, I think he's a worship pastor at a church, and he had a teenage son that was, as he was getting into like his 18, 19 years old or so, was just really starting to drift. And he was a musician like his dad, but he played in kind of a hard rock band. And the only place his band could get any gigs was in bars.
Yeah.
I guess after you were somewhat intoxicated, their music didn't sound so bad. And so he's out late a lot of Saturday nights, and so he's living the dream. He's a paid musician doing these gigs in bars, but then he's coming in so late on early Sunday mornings that he was missing a lot of church, and the dad and him were going at it, and the dad was just really worried about him and just didn't like his choice in music, the venues where he was playing, the people he was hanging out with, and they were just really getting at odds with each other. The son knew full well his dad was totally disappointed in him, and the dad is just so worried the son has been raised in a Christian home, and now he's hanging around with all kinds of unchristian influences. And one day the dad is in the kitchen getting ready to go to church Sunday morning, And his son comes out. It's obvious the son's been kind of waiting for his dad to get up. His son apparently has been up all night, and the son just says, basically, Dad, you just need to know my girlfriend is pregnant, and we're going to get an abortion, and that's just how it's going to be. And he walks out. And at that point, the dad just kind of hits the lowest point, just absolutely so angry and disappointed he can't even begin to just know how to even speak civilly to his son. But he's got to go to church and lead worship service. So has to get in his car. He's driving to church, and just in his mind, he's just so angry, and he's gripping his steering wheel, and he's gritting his teeth, and he's just rehearsing all the obnoxious things he's going to say to his son, and probably just boot him out of the house, and just think of just how tough he can make it on his son if he's going to live that way. And he gets up to the church, he looks up, and there's a big cross that he notices. And for some reason, some way, the Spirit of God just takes that cross and just really draws that to this man's attention. And basically God just says, before you cast too many stones at your son, do you realize what a sinner you were? And do you know how much it took to forgive you? Do you know how messed up you were before God saved you? And you were not a saint when God found you, and you've messed up plenty of times since. Don't be too quick to just condemn your son. And the dad is so overwhelmed by basically the fact he just had lost sight of the grace of God, that he pulled the car over into a parking stall and just leaned his head onto the steering wheel and just wept. And he just said, God, help me. I don't even know how to show grace to this is my own son, and I don't even know how to show grace to one of my own kids, and help me to do that. And so one of the things that the man kind of figured out he would do is he had never gone to any of his son's concerts, because they're always in a bar somewhere, and this is like a Baptist minister. He doesn't want to be seen in those kind of places. And but he decides, but it's my son, and so he decides he's going to go and just support his son, just watch. And so he goes down to this part of town he's never really frequented, and he's standing outside this bar, and he's having a panic attack. He's worried sick. What if someone sees me going in here? What if I lose my job because I'm going into places like this? But he just decides, I've got to make some choices here. And he said, I just felt like God said, what matters right now is your son, not even your job, not your reputation, but your son. So do what it takes to show grace to your son. So he goes in, he orders the most non-alcoholic looking beverage that they have on their menu. And he just stands out there. I mean, he does not fit that clientele. You can tell he doesn't belong there. And his son comes out to start playing the first set, and he sees his dad, and he almost just chokes. He thinks there's going to be a scene. Is my dad going to, yank me out of here? Is he going to, embarrass me in front of my friends? But his dad just sits there and claps when they're done a song, and just is nodding and trying to be encouraging. And so at the end of the first set, the son hurries over to his dad's table, says, Dad, what are you doing here? He's like, you hate this kind of music. You hate these kind of places. And his dad said, well, son, you're right about both of those. But he said, but I love you. And he said, I just don't think I've done a very good job of letting you know that. And so he said, I'm not here to embarrass you. You don't even have to talk to me. Don't have to acknowledge me. He said, I don't even really deserve to be honored as your dad right now. But he said, but I just really want to try to be the kind of dad you need. So he said, that's all, the only reason I'm here. And so he started trying to go and just support his son. Well, this dad is the one who told me that story. And now it was several months later. And he said, and as he was kind of telling me what had happened, he said, nothing happened overnight, but he said, I got to tell you this. He said, his girlfriend and my son decided not to have an abortion. They're planning to get married. And he said they've been in church, he said, every Sunday since, including the girlfriend. And he said, I think I've been a pastor, he said, all of my adult life, he said, but I think I'm just now beginning to discover what it looks like to be a person of grace.
Wow.
And here it is, his own son, and he's about to drive him out, burn that bridge so that there's no relationship whatsoever. And to his horror, he realizes that's not going to win him back. That's not going to win his girlfriend. It's grace that God uses to draw sinners to himself, to help people see themselves the way God does, and to have hope that God can change them. And so, there's so many stories like that where I certainly don't write it as an expert. I share a number of my own shortcomings in this book of just having to sort of process that to say, what would it look like to be a person of grace that doesn't just hold everybody up and examine them and shine a spotlight on them and say, well, they don't deserve grace. They don't deserve kindness. They don't deserve another chance. They don't deserve me being nice to them after all that they've done. And to say, but aren't you glad God doesn't hold you up to a spotlight like that before every time you pray and ask him to help you or forgive you? And does he run you through the ringer and say, well, you don't deserve any of this? It wouldn't be grace anymore. And so, there's a lot there. It's a short little read, really, this book. But there's lots of books that celebrate God's grace for us. But what I realized is there's not as many books on us showing grace to others. And we're just arms open wide, receiving all of the grace God has for us. But we become grace tightwad sometimes when it comes to giving it to others.
Yeah.
And so my prayer over this, especially this holiday season, but certainly going into the next year, is that God might just make you a little more graceful. And whether it's over disagreeing with how your church is handling COVID protocols, or whether it's politics and how your neighbor votes, can you be a person of grace that it doesn't matter?
Yeah.
That you love them just as much, you're just as kind, even when they're obnoxious, even when they totally disagree with your viewpoints on things that really matter to you. Can you just say, but I'm just a guy who's never gotten over the wonder of God's grace for me. How could I not show grace to the people all around me as well?
Yeah, well, it's a great message for this time of year, and it's something that we could all show more of and be better at. So appreciate you taking the time and walking us through this. And like always, we'll leave links to this book in the show notes. And until next time.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If this is something you enjoyed, it really makes a difference if you leave a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. We always love hearing from our listeners, so email us at podcast@blackaby.org.